Good evening. Welcome to the World Report. Tonight, a geopolitical shift unravels, power's foundation crumbling, especially along the corridors of regional influence. We begin with a collapse in motion, not dramatic collapse, the kind that blasts through headlines and ignites immediate international alarms, but a calculated, gradual erosion of stability, a fragmentation of strategic coherence, a blurring of lines Islamabad once thought mattered. The central figure is not mentioned, but the presence is unmistakable. We're tracking fissures within a long, dominant regional axis, an axis that for years has projected dominance through military capability, diplomatic yet terse messaging, and a relentless media narrative of resilience. That pillar is shaking. The collapse of any political order rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it often unfolds gradually, in a series of subtle yet telling shifts that accumulate over time until the cracks become too visible to ignore. What we are witnessing here is not the instant toppling of a regime or the sudden downfall of a figure once thought untouchable, but the slow erosion of power. This kind of decline is even more dangerous because it disguises itself as stability until it reaches a point of no return. The very systems that once projected dominance begin to falter, not from a lack of force, but from the gradual exhaustion of credibility, authority, and cohesion. For years, the political and strategic establishment at the center of this story has relied on a carefully cultivated image of strength, one that combines military power, diplomatic maneuvering, and the appearance of unity. Yet strength projected outward is not the same as stability within, and the erosion we now see is the result of years of unresolved contradictions, unmet promises, and overextended ambitions. When an order begins to decay, the first signs are often small, minor disagreements among decision makers, subtle misalignments between rhetoric and action, and gradual disengagement from once dependable allies. These early fissures rarely make headlines because they appear manageable, even normal. But left unaddressed, they expand, and over time the entire foundation weakens. The collapse in motion today is marked by exactly this pattern. Strategic coherence has slipped, domestic divisions have sharpened, and public faith in leadership has begun to fray. This erosion does not occur in isolation. It is amplified by global scrutiny and the pressures of a rapidly changing international order. A government or leader may claim resilience, but resilience loses meaning when external partners begin to question commitments and adversaries sense hesitation. The slow pace of this decline creates a paradox. On one hand, it allows those in power to deny that collapse is occurring, pointing instead to temporary victories, small displays of control, or the ability to suppress dissent. On the other hand, the very slowness of the erosion makes it more destructive. It is like a building with hidden structural damage from the outside. The facade still looks intact, but inside, the foundations are crumbling under the weight of neglect. When the cracks finally reach the surface, repair is no longer possible. This is what makes the current trajectory so significant. Every sign, be it weakened alliances, waning public support, or faltering military cohesion, points to a system no longer able to hold itself together under pressure. History teaches that such collapses are rarely reversible once they begin to unfold. The momentum of decline becomes self-reinforcing. Allies begin to hedge their bets, opponents grow bolder, and internal divisions widen. The collapse in motion may still be denied publicly, but the reality is clear to those watching closely. What is being lost is not just political capital or temporary influence, it is the very perception of inevitability that power depends upon. Once that perception erodes, no amount of rhetoric can rebuild it. The process is already underway, and the slow motion nature of this collapse makes it both more visible and more irreversible. One of the clearest signals of decline in any political or strategic order is when allies, once firmly aligned, begin to drift away and pursue their own paths. For years, alliances have been the backbone of regional dominance, amplifying power by projecting unity and coordinated strength. These relationships created not just practical advantages such as military cooperation, economic ties, and diplomatic cover, but also a symbolic image of stability. To stand with powerful allies was to share in their authority. Now, however, that unity is unraveling, and the divergence of interests is becoming impossible to ignore. What was once a tightly knit web of coordination is increasingly a patchwork of separate agendas, each shaped more by self-interest than by collective strategy. This weakening of alliances is a profound indicator of erosion because it strikes at the very core of influence. Without dependable partners, the reach of any power shrinks, its decisions carry less weight, and its ability to shape outcomes in the region diminishes. The cracks in these alliances often start quietly, with small disagreements over policy, military tactics, or diplomatic moves. At first, these are dismissed as ordinary tensions, the kind that exist in any partnership. But over time, the disagreements become more visible and more consequential. Some partners begin to question whether their loyalty is being rewarded, while others worry that continued alignment exposes them to unnecessary risks. This rethinking leads to a gradual distancing. Allies begin to hedge, making moves that preserve their own options rather than binding themselves to shared strategies. The once predictable choreography of regional coordination falters, and with every hesitation, the aura of dominance fades. Externally, adversaries notice these shifts immediately. A fractured alliance is an opportunity. Where once they faced a unified bloc, they now see openings to exploit through diplomacy, trade deals, or quiet military probes. Even small acts of defiance by allies send ripples across the region, signaling that the protective umbrella of partnership is no longer absolute. Global players, too, recalibrate their approach, seeing less benefit in aligning with a weakening order. The more that allies diverge, the harder it becomes to sustain the image of cohesion, and the collapse accelerates. Domestically, the erosion of alliances creates pressure as well. Leaders once able to boast of strong partnerships as evidence of their strength now face criticism when those partnerships begin to falter. Citizens question why long-standing allies are pulling away, and opposition forces use the shifting landscape to argue that leadership has failed to protect the nation's standing. The narrative shifts from one of dominance to one of isolation, a dangerous transformation in any political arena. Allies turning away also affects decision-making within the core of power. Without the certainty of support, choices become more cautious, more defensive. Initiatives that once relied on collective strength now seem risky, and hesitation replaces assertiveness. This loss of confidence feeds back into the cycle of decline, encouraging further distance among partners who see hesitation as weakness. What emerges is a vicious circle. Allies distance themselves because they perceive weakness, and their distance further deepens that weakness. The collapse in motion is therefore not just about external opposition, but about the unraveling of relationships that once served as the lifeblood of influence. Domestic pressure has always been the silent force that shapes the durability of leadership. A system can project strength abroad, claim victories in regional disputes, or rely on military capability to maintain an aura of dominance. But when pressure builds from within, it corrodes authority from the ground up. In the current moment, domestic unrest is not defined by one single issue, but by a convergence of many: disillusionment with leadership, fatigue from repeated crises, and a sense that promises made in the past have gone unfulfilled. This convergence creates a powerful undercurrent that is difficult to contain, and it is this very undercurrent that signals the weakening of what once appeared to be unshakable power. Public discontent is rising in multiple forms. Street protests, online dissent, and cultural resistance all indicate a population less willing to accept the narratives fed to them by authority. Where once the public may have tolerated harsh policies in the name of security or stability, they are now questioning whether those sacrifices were worthwhile. Economic strain adds to this unrest as citizens grapple with high costs of living, unemployment, and widening inequality. Each of these factors chips away at the legitimacy of leadership, fueling a sense of frustration that no amount of rhetoric can easily suppress. This kind of internal frustration does not need to be universal to be dangerous. Even pockets of resistance can erode the image of consensus, giving momentum to larger movements. Legal and political challenges intensify the domestic pressure. Investigations, court cases, and parliamentary disputes all serve to undermine the credibility of leadership. These legal troubles create the perception of corruption, mismanagement, or abuse of power, whether or not they result in convictions. In politics, perception matters just as much as reality. A leader battling legal challenges is seen as distracted, vulnerable, and less capable of governing effectively. Rivals seize on this vulnerability, amplifying the narrative that leadership is crumbling from within. As legal scrutiny deepens, trust in the system declines, and citizens begin to wonder if the political order they have lived under for years is sustainable. The media plays a crucial role in amplifying domestic pressure. Once tightly controlled narratives are now fractured, with alternative voices challenging the official line and exposing cracks in the government's story. In an age where information flows rapidly, it is nearly impossible to contain damaging revelations or suppress dissenting perspectives. Each broadcast of discontent, each viral story of mismanagement, fuels the perception that leadership is no longer in control. The more defensive authorities become, the more they confirm the suspicion that they are losing their grip. Internally, this pressure also affects the ruling class itself. Supporters who once stood firmly by the leadership begin to waver, calculating their own political survival. Some defect quietly, others openly criticize, but each departure signals to the public that the once solid walls of authority are weakening. As divisions grow, decision-making slows, paralysis sets in, and the leadership's ability to respond effectively diminishes. The collapse in motion is thus not only external but deeply internal, rooted in a society that is no longer willing to bear the weight of a failing system. Military and strategic weakness is one of the most visible indicators of a system in decline. For decades, the projection of strength has relied heavily on the perception that the military is disciplined, well-coordinated, and fully capable of responding to any threat. That perception alone can deter adversaries and reassure allies. Yet, when cracks begin to form within the armed forces, the entire narrative of dominance unravels. Morale among soldiers and officers becomes fragile, resources are stretched thin, and disagreements over tactics expose deeper divisions in leadership. The result is a slow but undeniable weakening of the very institution that has long served as the backbone of security and power. Reports of faltering morale are particularly damaging because morale is not simply about spirit, it is about confidence in leadership, belief in the mission, and trust in the system that commands them. When soldiers no longer feel supported or question the clarity of their objectives, discipline erodes. Small lapses in performance accumulate into larger failures, and the reputation of the military begins to suffer. Public trust in the military, often one of the last remaining pillars of legitimacy for any government, starts to diminish as stories of internal frustration or desertion come to light. Once the public loses faith in the military's capacity, the wider perception of national strength quickly follows. Logistical problems also play a central role in exposing weakness. A powerful military is not just about weapons or manpower, it is about sustaining those forces effectively. Shortages of equipment, lack of proper training, outdated technology, and strained budgets create vulnerabilities that cannot be hidden forever. Each logistical failure undermines confidence internally and projects weakness externally. Adversaries closely monitor these signs, adjusting their strategies to exploit gaps, while allies begin to reconsider their reliance on a force that can no longer guarantee stability. Even when leadership attempts to mask these shortcomings through propaganda, the growing gap between image and reality becomes obvious. Disagreements over strategy deepen the crisis. Military leaders and political figures may clash over how to allocate resources, when to deploy forces, or how to address emerging threats. These disagreements create paralysis as decisions are delayed or contradicted by competing authorities. Within the ranks, this lack of clarity breeds confusion and frustration. Commanders in the field struggle to execute plans when orders are inconsistent or change suddenly due to political interference. Such disarray not only weakens the military's effectiveness, but also signals to the outside world that leadership is fragmented and reactive rather than proactive. The weakening of military strength ultimately reshapes the broader strategic landscape. Without a dependable military, deterrence is lost. Rivals begin to push boundaries, testing defenses with calculated provocations. Allies, once assured of protection, start seeking alternative partnerships or even making quiet deals with adversaries. In this way, the decline of the military triggers a wider collapse of strategic influence. The collapse in motion is not just about what happens on the battlefield, but about the shifting balance of power that comes when the very foundation of defense is no longer secure. Global repercussions are inevitable when a dominant power begins to falter. In international politics, strength and weakness do not exist in isolation. They ripple outward, shaping the decisions of allies, adversaries, and neutral actors alike. As the cracks in authority grow more visible, the entire regional and global order adjusts, recalibrating around new realities. What once seemed fixed, a leader's dominance, a nation's influence, or an alliance's coherence, suddenly becomes fluid, uncertain, and open to challenge. This uncertainty invites opportunism. States that have long been held in check by the shadow of power begin to test boundaries, probing for vulnerabilities. Diplomatic maneuvers shift, economic partnerships are reconsidered, and regional balances tilt as rivals seize the moment to advance their agendas. The weakening of one actor almost always translates into opportunity for others. Adversaries are often the first to capitalize on such shifts. They sense hesitation, recognize internal divisions, and exploit them. Through increased military activity near contested borders, cyber operations, or targeted propaganda campaigns, they work to deepen the perception of decline. The more visible the cracks, the bolder their moves. For years, adversaries may have waited patiently, deterred by the aura of overwhelming strength. But as that aura fades, deterrence collapses, and opportunities emerge that once seemed unthinkable. Even symbolic gestures, such as forging new alliances or openly challenging policies, take on greater weight in a moment when confidence in the established order is slipping. Allies, by contrast, respond differently. Where once they aligned unquestioningly, they now hedge their bets. Doubts creep into their calculations, and loyalty is no longer guaranteed. Some begin to distance themselves diplomatically, while others quietly explore partnerships with alternative powers. This realignment is rarely sudden. It takes place gradually, through subtle policy shifts, unexpected abstentions in international votes, or new trade agreements that bypass former partners. Yet the significance of these moves cannot be overstated. Allies turning elsewhere signal to the world that the center of power is weakening, and once that perception takes hold, it becomes difficult to reverse. The global economic landscape also feels the tremors of such a collapse in motion. Investors grow cautious, wary of instability, and markets react to uncertainty with volatility. Nations dependent on the declining power for trade, defense, or aid start seeking alternatives to safeguard their futures. Supply chains, military contracts, and diplomatic frameworks all shift as confidence erodes. The weakening of a once dominant player creates not just political gaps, but economic ones, reshaping trade flows and investment priorities across entire regions. Beyond geopolitics and economics, the broader narrative of decline affects global opinion. International institutions, non-state actors, and media outlets begin to frame the faltering power not as a stabilizing force, but as a liability. This shift in perception changes how decisions are made on the world stage. When a nation is no longer seen as reliable or dominant, its ability to set agendas, broker peace, or influence negotiations diminishes sharply. The collapse in motion, therefore, is not confined within borders. It spreads outward, reshaping alliances, emboldening rivals, and altering the global order itself. When leadership shifts from projecting strength to managing damage, it signals a profound change in the balance of power. In moments of stability, leaders act with confidence, dictating the narrative, setting the agenda, and using decisive action to reinforce authority. Every move is calculated to display control, leaving little room for doubt about who holds power. But once a system begins to decline, the energy that once fueled projection of dominance is redirected toward containment. Instead of shaping events, leaders react to them. Instead of inspiring confidence, they scramble to patch cracks, respond to criticism, and prevent small problems from spiraling into crisis. This shift from assertiveness to defensiveness is one of the clearest signs of collapse in motion, and it rarely reverses once it begins. The most immediate impact of this change is psychological. Citizens, allies, and even adversaries can sense when confidence has given way to insecurity. Rhetoric may remain bold, but actions reveal hesitation. Announcements that once inspired unity now sound defensive, filled with explanations and justifications rather than vision. Each attempt to contain damage only highlights the weakness being covered up. The population begins to perceive leadership not as a force driving the nation forward, but as a stumbling structure barely keeping itself upright. In politics, perception is power, and once the perception shifts, it accelerates the decline. Internally, this mode of governance erodes efficiency. Leaders bogged down by firefighting cannot dedicate energy to long-term planning or reform. Decision-making slows as every choice is weighed more for how it might protect authority than for its actual effectiveness. The bureaucracy grows paralyzed, unsure whether to follow orders that may change under the pressure of public backlash or legal scrutiny. Officials who once followed confidently begin to hesitate, and hesitation spreads like a contagion throughout the system. In time, even loyalists begin to doubt whether their support will ensure stability or drag them down with a sinking order. Externally, damage management weakens credibility on the international stage. Global partners recognize when a state is no longer proactive but reactive, and they adapt accordingly. Confidence in that power's ability to lead or uphold agreements diminishes. Rivals, meanwhile, grow emboldened, seizing opportunities to test boundaries, knowing that the response will likely be cautious, delayed, or incomplete. The shift from strength to damage control becomes a green light for adversaries to push harder and for allies to seek alternatives. What was once an unshakable pillar of influence turns into a fragile piece of the puzzle. constantly shoring up its position but never quite regaining dominance. The irony of this transformation is that the harder leadership works to preserve its image, the more fragile it appears. Every denial, every rushed response, and every attempt to suppress dissent becomes evidence of vulnerability. The collapse in motion is revealed not through dramatic defeat, but through the gradual replacement of vision with survival tactics. At this stage, leadership no longer drives events, it merely reacts to them, and in doing so, it confirms that the center of power is slipping away,